The following is an excerpt from the According to Metal podcast.
All right, joining us on According to Metal this episode is not one, but two guests that not only are an incredible band themselves, but also have some really cool things they're doing and have going on. And I got to tell you, we get a chance, Biv and I get a chance to see them live here very, very soon. In fact, depending on when you hear this, maybe we already did or maybe we're about to. But joining us on the podcast this week, of course, is Jake Dreyer from Witherfall and Iced Earth, and Joseph Michael, also from Witherfall, who's going to be part of the Iced Earth tour. More on that in a moment. We'll get into that in a second. But hey, Jake, Joseph, welcome to According to Metal, guys.
How you doing, man?
Hey, man.
I want to talk a little bit more about Iced Earth and your upcoming tour that both of you are on, essentially, in one way, shape, or form. We'll get to that here in a bit. But I think it's criminal how Witherfall doesn't get the recognition that it deserves, because Nocturnes and Requiems is a killer album that I think many, including myself, found to be one of the better releases last year. So, Jake, I'll ask you this. How did Witherfall become a band? How did it get started? I mean, I know you guys had some history before with White Wizard. Is that kind of where the friendship and the bandmates kind of gathered, or how did it come to happen?
Totally. I mean, it happened in pretty much the I would say the third quarter of 2013. Joseph and I were on tour with the band mentioned before, White Wizard. We were over in the UK, and things just weren't going really that well. And I had always wanted to start a band that was more tailored to, like, on the darker side of things, that was a little bit more progressive. At the same time, had really catchy songs, though, but also just kind of had no ceiling to it, no rules. We could write whatever we wanted to write, and just whatever we felt in our heads, you know. And I had mentioned the idea to Joseph when things were falling apart on that tour, and he was all for it. And so pretty much as soon as we both got back to LA, we had got together in my apartment and pretty much wrote Nocturnes and Requiems. At that time, we also had the drummer Adam Sagan, who I had worked with beforehand in 2010 on an instrumental EP, and so he was always a guy that was going to be a part of the band, and he did a lot of pre-production with us, and of course recorded Nocturnes and Requiems, and unfortunately passed in the end of 2016. But that's pretty much, like, Joseph might be able to add some more, but that's kind of the gist of how Witherfall became Witherfall.
I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, one thing I could say is that during the whole startup process that took maybe a year and a half to 2 years between writing and getting like the early stages of production done, we faced so much nonsense that, like, I don't know, we became this kind of bullheaded, unstoppable, you know, force of madness, and I think it's just carried us through, like, the momentum of having to stomp all over people that have been getting in our way, you know. So, like, along the way, we found some guys that you know were on board and as hungry and as talented and as should I say special as the two of us. Yeah, I mean, it's really taken on a life of its own since we birthed it, you know, a few years ago.
It's been quite the process, quite the journey, though, because I mean, we're talking about. I mean, Joseph and I first came up with the idea of this, like we were saying, at the end of 2013, and right now we're in 2018. So we're talking about some time here, but it's you know, none of that's ever been resting. It's been totally just, you know, we've been pedal to the metal, working our asses off, trying to get this to where it's at. And thank you for saying it's criminally underrated, because we would love it to be, you know, we definitely feel that we have a lot more, you know, to go, and we're working our asses out there to try to get Witherfall to out to the masses.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And I always had the joke, you know, in today's day and age of bands trying to generate revenue, I've always thought it's kind of a joke of having, like, White Wizard Fest. And you could have all of the bands of members of their bands, since they've left White Wizard, have their own festival. And you'd have like 20 bands, wouldn't you? I mean, you'd have a ton.
You'd have something close to that, man. I mean,
it's like 7 degrees of White Wizard separation. It's like this guy knew Lord. This guy who was in White Wizard who's now in this killer band that's way better. Anyway, say it.
I think one of the things though is that, like, if you look at a lot of those projects, they're kind of trying to do something similar, and they just didn't like the people involved in that project.
Fair enough.
Like, as far as Jake and I go, like, we're kind of like our own. We're composers in a different way. Like, that's kind of like that band was going to fall apart whether or not like everything was run correctly or not, because Jake and I like had a different vision from the start, really, and we weren't able to really have an impact on that band. So eventually we would have ended up doing something, but we were just kind of, our hand was kind of forced, you know? So like it's all those bands are a totally different animal, I think. That
and plus you could say that, like, you know, it's, you can't compare White Wizard and Witherfall if we're too.
Oh no, not at all. No, I'm just making the joke that it's we've. I don't know how many guests we've had on the show that are trees of White Wizard at some point.
Oh,
yeah. Well,
yeah, and you know, if you wanted to, like, just for shits and giggles, I mean, if you added up all the therapy and psychology bills from all those ex-members, you probably could buy a nice piece of property in Silver Lake in Los Angeles.
There you go. I could do that. We'll get Eli and Santana involved on that one too.
Start our own asylum.
Yeah. Let's do it. That's a good idea. Now, I will ask you this really quick. So you would kind of touch on this a little bit, but Joseph, I'll ask you this. For those who are not familiar with Witherfall's sound, because we've alluded to it a handful of times, what would be the best way you would describe your sound to a metalhead?
I've said it from the beginning. We are just plain and simple dark melodic metal. We are not, you know, any of those subgenres exclusively, even though we've been called prog metal or power metal, but I think what separates us is there's a lot of melodic happy metal and there's a lot of heavy dark metal, but there's not a lot of melodic dark metal. Like it's usually the darker bands that have some semblance of melody still don't have what I would call songs. You know what I mean? Like that's where like the Nevermore comparisons come into play.
That's a very fair comparison. Certainly.
King Diamond, Nevermore. Like I think that we take that darker edge that some of the death and black metal and you know some of the modern metal bands have, but we give it like a real song oriented melodic spin.
Yeah, I was reading on your Facebook page, Joseph, where there was somebody who commented that. The best comparison that you've seen so far for Witherfall was King Diamond meets Nevermore with Jason Becker playing guitar or something along those lines. Is that correct?
Yeah. That works. We're a little more modern, I think, than King Diamond and Nevermore, but
I would agree.
My favorite comparison so far has been if Mozart were to smoke pot and listen to Nevermore and Pink Floyd at the same time, then compose a record. That would kind of be like the equivalent of what it is, because it is very classical influence. Like Joseph and I are both huge fans of like assorted versions of what you would call, you know, like the classical era between Mozart and Beethoven, and a lot of romantic stuff with Chopin and Liszt.
For sure.
And so we have a lot of that as well, but we also, you know, we love bands like King Diamond that have like these really cool dark melodies going on. Like was mentioned, Nevermore, Dream Theater, Sabotage, a lot of those bands, and of course Jason Becker and Yngwie. So it's just imagine those all
wrapped up into one. Yeah.
Also, like the biggest one too is Queen. I think Queen is our biggest influence for sure.
Nice. And I hear that a time or two, certainly on a couple of tracks, certainly on the album, that you feel that you hear kind of that kind of 70s Queen vibe really in a couple of tracks, certainly.
The arrangements are so very Pink Floyd and Queen, where we have that. I think Jake said this in the beginning. We gave ourselves no limits. We were just gonna write. We're gonna sit there. We're gonna drink wine and we're gonna write until 7 a.m. and whatever the hell we write, that's it. That's Witherfall. And if it doesn't fall into some paradigm within the metal community, then who gives a shit?
Good for you. Amen. Because I hate the pigeonholing of certain bands and genres, and we have to be a melodic death metal band. That's just who we are.
Exactly.
So good for you guys. I think that's really cool. So
I mean, you would never say that about like a band like Queen. Like, oh, what does Queen sound like? You know, like what does Guns N' Roses sound like? You can't just pick a song because you could just point to something else that totally contradicts it.
Absolutely. That's to me is what makes music, you know? It's like you listen to I don't want to listen to a record and it just sounds the exact same song for, 10 tracks or so for 50 minutes. It's like I want to be put on a journey, almost like a movie where it's like, it's got to have these peaks and these valleys of sadness and happiness and dark and light. So to me, that was like some of the best records, like my favorite records of all time always did that kind of stuff. It was totally like a roller coaster ride you were on.
So Nocturnes and Requiems has been out for just almost a year, if not just a little bit over a year. So what has been the feedback you've gotten so far? Not just from guys like me who have shows and podcasts and reviewers, but what are people that are just discovering your band? What do they say about the album? And are you happy with the results of it, or are there parts of it that are disappointing to you?
Jay, I mean, here's the thing: we've never played a show until last week, and when we stepped on that boat, I mean, there were people like coming up to us and thanking us for that record.
No shit, like, that's cool.
It's crazy because nobody knows who we are really. Like we're
a baby band.
Yeah, we're a brand new band, but like whatever we did affected those people enough where like they searched us out and they knew all the history and they knew all about Adam and when we spread Adam's ashes on the thing, like people were crying in the audience. Like there's like a real story here and people are really connecting to the music. And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think with like, a lot of the feedback that we get, I mean, there's no use to talk really about the good feedback, but even the negative stuff that we've got, it's been mainly people that just said, I don't get it. Like, I don't sit and listen because, Nocturnes and Requiems, it's one of those records where you kind of have to sit down and if you want to explore the whole thing, it kind of takes some brain power.
Oh, sure. You have a lot of 9-minute songs on there. You know what I mean? I mean, that's.
And so that's been the only kind of negative thing that we've ever gotten from people is they simply say, they don't say it's bad. No one said it. Oh, this is a shit record. These songs suck. They've almost just kind of said, I don't get it. I don't really get what you were going for, which, hey, fair enough. There's a lot of bands out there that people love that I don't get either. So it's, that's what music, that's the beauty of music is there is no right or wrong. So that's really almost kind of been like the negative thing. And honestly, I don't even really consider it negative. It's just, it hits certain people more than it does others. And the great thing is that it certainly has hit quite a bit of people. We were pretty impressed by, like Joseph was just saying, our debut show on 70K. We had a good amount of people there, man, that were really, they were into it. They knew the songs, which is our first show, and people are singing the lyrics to In the Time or some shit like that. It's, you're kind of like, wow, this is cool. We're, it's getting there, man. But we understand we're a baby band and we got a lot of work ahead of us.
I want the listeners to know this. I want you guys to know this because this is absolutely true. Biv and I last year, when we found out that Iced Earth was coming to Indianapolis, and Biv lives in Indy, we bought tickets right away, not only because it's Iced Earth, but I was stoked to find out that Sanctuary's opening up for Iced Earth. Huge Warrel Dane fan, huge Nevermore fan. In fact, I got to hang out with Warrel backstage at the Aurora Rock House in Illinois. I don't know how many years ago. He was drunk out of his mind, but a cool dude. And we just really hit it off and had a great time talking. And so it was one of those things where you're sitting there thinking like, dude, I can't wait to see Warrel Dane perform again. He's with Sanctuary. I've never seen him with Sanctuary. And then, of course, we heard the news and obviously saw the news, and it was terrible to think. And then the thought of me was, well, there goes Sanctuary. They're not going to do the tour, of course. which kind of brings us all back for full circle here, is when we heard that, now we come to find out that, of course, Joseph Michael, who we're talking to right now, is filling in for Warrel Dane during Sanctuary's tour with Iced Earth, which is absolutely incredible. And I'll be honest with you, Joseph, I went back and I'm like, oh, dude, that might work. And then I go and listen to